The conference room erupted into chaos as Hiroshi Yamamoto slammed his leather portfolio shut and stood abruptly from the mahogany table. Michael Harrison watched in horror as $500 million walked toward the door in an impeccably tailored Armani suit. "Mr. Yamamoto, please," Michael called out, his voice steady despite the panic clawing at his chest. "There's been a misunderstanding." The elderly Japanese businessman turned slowly, his weathered face carved from stone. When he spoke, his English was precise but laced with unmistakable disappointment. "Mr. Harrison, your company has insulted our intelligence with these amateur proposals. The technical specifications are completely wrong, and your cultural presentation was offensive to our traditions." Michael's jaw tightened. 3 years of negotiations, countless flights to Tokyo, and millions in development costs were about to vanish because some idiot in his technical department had botched the translation of critical engineering documents. The Yamamoto Corporation wasn't just any client. They were the gateway to the entire Asian market, and losing them would trigger a domino effect that could destroy Harrison Global within months. Linda Parker, our senior translator, personally reviewed every document, Michael said, though even as the words left his mouth, he realized he hadn't seen Linda since yesterday afternoon. "She's fluent in both technical Japanese and business protocol." Yamamoto's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s, whispered something urgent in his ear. The old man's expression darkened further. "Your Ms. Parker is not here today," Yamamoto said coldly. "The documents we received this morning contain errors that suggest they were processed by amateur translation software. Worse, the cultural references in your presentation suggest complete ignorance of Japanese business customs. You scheduled this meeting during Obon Week. You served beef at lunch knowing we follow Buddhist dietary restrictions, and your opening remarks referenced Hiroshima in a business context." Michael felt the blood drain from his face. Every single detail Yamamoto mentioned was something Linda would have caught and corrected. She had been handling Japanese relations for Harrison Global for 8 years. There was no way she would have made these mistakes. "Sir, I can assure you that these errors do not represent our company's actual capabilities," Michael began. But Yamamoto was already moving toward the door. "Mr. Harrison, in Japan, we have a saying, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. Your company sticks out in all the wrong ways. Good day." The heavy oak door closed with a finality that echoed through Michael's chest like a death knell. Around the conference table, 6 members of Harrison Global's executive team sat in stunned silence. Amanda Stevens, his business partner and former lover, was the first to speak. "Michael, what the hell just happened?" Her perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the table's surface. "We had this deal locked down. Where's Linda?" Michael was already pulling out his phone, dialing Linda's number for the 4th time since the meeting began. It went straight to voicemail again. "Linda Parker, senior translator and cultural liaison. Please leave a message and I'll return your call promptly." "She's not answering," Michael muttered, loosening his tie. The walls of the conference room seemed to be closing in. "Tom, when did you last speak with Linda?" Tom Rodriguez, head of operations, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Yesterday around 3 p.m. She said she was reviewing the final translations for today's presentation." Everything seemed normal. Amanda stood and began pacing, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "This is a disaster. Yamamoto represents 40% of our projected revenue for the next fiscal year. Without this deal, we're looking at massive layoffs and possible bankruptcy within 18 months. Michael's phone buzzed with a text message. His heart leaped, hoping it was Linda, but instead he saw a message from his secretary. "Linda Parker called in sick this morning. Left message saying family emergency. No other details." "Family emergency," Michael announced to the room. "But that doesn't explain why she didn't review these documents properly beforehand." "Maybe she did review them," Amanda said, stopping her pacing. "Maybe someone else changed them after she finished." The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Michael had built Harrison Global on loyalty and trust, but in the cutthroat world of international business, sabotage wasn't unheard of. Still, the idea that someone inside his own company would deliberately torpedo a deal this size seemed impossible. "I need those original translation files," Michael said, his voice taking on the commanding tone that had built his empire. "Tom, give me access to Linda's computer and office. Amanda, contact our IT department and have them trace every document that went out to Yamamoto this week. I want to know exactly when and where these errors were introduced. And if we can't fix this? Amanda asked. Michael looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere out there, Yamamoto was probably already on the phone with his board of directors, explaining why Harrison Global wasn't worth their investment. Other potential partners would hear about the failed deal within hours. In the interconnected world of international business, reputation was everything, and his was currently in free fall. Then we find another way, Michael said quietly. We always do. But even as he spoke the words, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that this time was different. This time, he might have finally met a problem that money and determination couldn't solve. The Harrison Global building stood nearly empty at 2:30 in the morning, its floors illuminated only by emergency lighting and the occasional glow from Michael's corner office on the 42nd floor. He had sent his team home hours ago after their frantic search through Linda's files yielded nothing but more questions. Every document on Linda's computer appeared normal. The translations were perfect, the cultural notes meticulous, the technical specifications flawless. Yet somehow, the materials that reached Yamamoto's office had been completely different. Michael had called Linda's number 17 times since the meeting ended. Her voicemail box was now full. The Yamamoto deal represented more than just money to Michael. It was validation that Harrison Global could compete with the industry giants, that the company his father had nearly destroyed with corruption could rise again under his leadership. Now that validation was slipping through his fingers like smoke. Michael stared at the stack of documents spread across his mahogany desk. Somewhere in these papers lay the answer to what had gone wrong, but his exhausted mind couldn't process the Japanese characters anymore. The language looked like elegant scratches to his untrained eye, beautiful but completely incomprehensible. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. Michael looked up to see a woman in a gray maintenance uniform standing in his doorway, pushing a cleaning cart. She appeared to be in her early 30s with long black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and intelligent dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Mr. Harrison," she said quietly. "I can come back later if you're busy." "No, it's fine," Michael said, rubbing his temples. "I didn't realize anyone else was still here." The woman entered and began emptying his waste paper basket with practiced efficiency. "Night shift usually runs until 4 a.m. I'm Sarah Chun." Michael nodded absently and returned his attention to the documents. Sarah worked quietly around his office, dusting shelves and wiping down surfaces, but he noticed her glancing occasionally at the papers on his desk. There was something in her expression that caught his attention. Not curiosity exactly, but recognition. "Japanese business contracts," Sarah observed softly as she cleaned the conference table near his desk. "You can read Japanese?" Michael asked, surprised. "A little," Sarah replied, though something in her tone suggested modesty rather than truth. "My grandmother was from Kyoto." Michael felt a spark of desperate hope. "These documents are supposed to be identical to what we submitted to our Japanese partners yesterday, but they claim we sent them something completely different. I'm trying to figure out what went wrong." Sarah hesitated, glancing toward the door as if considering whether to involve herself in executive business. After a moment, she set down her cleaning supplies and approached his desk. "May I look?" she asked. Michael gestured to the papers. Sarah picked up the top document and scanned it quickly. Her expression shifted almost immediately. "This is wrong," she said quietly. "What do you mean wrong?" Sarah pointed to a section near the top of the page. "This character here. It should be precision manufacturing, but it says shoddy construction. And this phrase about partnership. In Japanese, it reads more like temporary exploitation." Michael's blood went cold. "Are you sure?" Sarah continued reading, her finger tracing along the lines of text. "The entire tone is wrong. Instead of respectful business language, this reads almost like an insult. And here, where you probably meant to reference technological innovation, it actually says something closer to borrowed ideas." "Jesus Christ," Michael breathed. No wonder Yamamoto walked out. "There's more," Sarah said, picking up another document. "Your cultural presentation notes. You scheduled the meeting during Obon Week, which is like asking American executives to negotiate on Christmas Day. The lunch menu included beef, but the document indicates they follow Buddhist dietary restrictions. These aren't translation errors." Someone deliberately sabotaged this. Michael stared at Sarah as if seeing her for the first time. This woman who emptied his trash cans and vacuumed his carpets was reading complex business Japanese with the fluency of a native speaker and identifying cultural nuances that had escaped his entire international relations department. "Who are you?" he asked. "I told you. Sarah-chun. I work the night cleaning crew." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." Sarah carefully set the documents back on his desk and stepped away. "I should finish my rounds. I've said too much already." "Wait," Michael said, standing quickly. "Can you fix this? Can you translate what these documents were supposed to say?" Sarah paused at his office door. "It's not that simple, Mr. Harrison. The damage is already done. Yamamoto Corporation values honor and respect above profit. They feel insulted. But if I could show them the correct translations, prove that this was sabotage." "You would need to approach them correctly," Sarah said carefully. "With proper cultural protocol. A formal apology that acknowledges the specific nature of the offense. And you would need to identify who was responsible for the sabotage, because they'll want assurance it won't happen again." Michael felt something he hadn't experienced in hours: hope. "How long would it take you to prepare the correct translations and cultural approach?" Sarah checked her watch. 2 minutes for a basic translation. 2 hours for something that might actually salvage your relationship with them. "Do it," Michael said immediately. "Whatever you need. I'll pay you 10 times your normal salary." "Mr. Harrison, I'm a janitor. You don't even know if you can trust me. Right now, you're the only person in this building who seems to understand what went wrong," Michael replied. "And something tells me there's a lot more to you than emptying waste paper baskets." Sarah studied his face for a long moment, as if weighing risks he couldn't begin to imagine. Finally, she nodded. 2 hours, she said. "But I'll need access to your computer system and Linda Parker's original files." "Done." "And Mr. Harrison, when this is over, you're going to have questions about me that I'm not ready to answer." "I'll worry about that later," Michael said. "Right now, you might be the only thing standing between me and bankruptcy." Sarah nodded and returned to his desk, already reaching for the phone to begin what would either be the most important 2 hours of Michael's career or the beginning of something far more complicated than either of them could anticipate. Michael arrived at his office the next morning to find an email from Hiroshi Yamamoto waiting in his inbox. The subject line read, "Reconsideration of partnership proposal." His heart hammered against his ribs as he opened the message. The email was formal but positive. Yamamoto acknowledged receiving the corrected translations and cultural addendum that Sarah had prepared through the night. He expressed appreciation for the detailed explanation of the sabotage and Michael's swift action to address the security breach. Most importantly, he agreed to reschedule their meeting for the following week. Sarah had saved his company. A janitor with mysterious language skills had accomplished what his entire international relations department couldn't do. The woman who cleaned his office had just prevented Harrison Global from sliding into bankruptcy. Michael immediately called Human Resources. "I need Sarah Chin's employment file," he told Director Patricia Volkov. "She works the night cleaning crew." "Mr. Harrison, is there a problem with her performance? Because if so, I should mention that cleaning staff are managed by an outside contractor." "No problem. I want to offer her a position." 15 minutes later, Patricia appeared in his office with a thin manila folder. Sarah Chin's file contained almost nothing. No college transcripts, no previous employment history beyond a few scattered service jobs, no professional references. Her address listed a modest apartment building in Queens. Emergency contact was listed as Dr. James Mitchell with a phone number for Mount Sinai Hospital. The file raised more questions than it answered. How did someone with no apparent educational background speak fluent business Japanese? Why was a hospital doctor her emergency contact? And most puzzling of all, why was someone with her obvious intelligence and skills working night janitorial shifts? Michael's contemplation was interrupted when Amanda Stevens burst through his office door without knocking. Her usually immaculate blonde hair was slightly disheveled, and her blue eyes blazed with barely controlled fury. "Have you lost your mind?" she demanded, slamming a copy of the Yamamoto email onto his desk. "You gave our internal translation protocols to a cleaning lady?" "That cleaning lady saved our biggest deal," Michael replied calmly. "And apparently she did it better than our entire professional staff." "Michael, we don't know anything about this woman. She could be corporate espionage. She could be working for our competitors. You just handed confidential client information to someone whose background we haven't even checked. I had Patricia pull her file. Sarah Chun, Queen's address, clean employment record with the cleaning contractor. Amanda laughed bitterly. A thin file that tells us nothing. Michael, successful corporate spies don't leave paper trails pointing to their real identities. They create exactly the kind of minimal background that makes them invisible. Michael had considered the same possibility, but something about Sarah's demeanor suggested authenticity rather than deception. She had seemed reluctant to help, almost afraid of drawing attention to herself. That wasn't the behavior he would expect from a corporate spy. What do you propose? Michael asked. Fire her, pay her for her help last night, and send her away before she can do any real damage. Or I could hire her as my personal assistant and keep her where I can monitor her activities. Amanda stared at him as if he had suggested jumping off the building roof. You want to give her more access to sensitive information? I want to understand who she really is, Michael said. And I want her skills working for us instead of for whoever might recruit her next. The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the office door. Sarah appeared in the doorway, wearing the same gray maintenance uniform from the night before. Her dark hair was still pulled back in a practical ponytail, but she looked tired, as if she hadn't slept. Mr. Harrison, you asked me to stop by before my shift ended? Sarah, please come in, Michael said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. This is Amanda Stevens, my business partner. Sarah nodded politely to Amanda, who responded with a cool smile that didn't reach her eyes. The tension between the two women was immediate and palpable. I wanted to thank you again for last night, Michael continued. Your work quite literally saved this company. I was glad to help, Sarah replied quietly. I have a proposition for you. I'd like to offer you a position as my personal assistant. The salary would be significantly higher than your current job, and you'd be working regular business hours. Sarah's expression became carefully neutral. Mr. Harrison, I'm not qualified for that kind of position. I don't have a college degree or business experience. You have skills that proved more valuable than any degree last night, Michael said. I need someone I can trust to handle sensitive international communications. This is a mistake, Amanda interjected. Michael, we should discuss this privately before making any offers. Sarah looked between them, clearly sensing the underlying conflict. Perhaps Miss Stevens is right. I should stick to what I know. What do you know? Michael asked directly. Because translating complex Japanese business documents isn't something people learn casually. For a moment, Sarah's carefully maintained composure slipped, and Michael caught a glimpse of something deeper in her eyes. Fear, perhaps, or pain from memories she preferred to keep buried. My grandmother taught me when I was young, Sarah said finally. She believed languages were important for understanding different cultures. It was a reasonable explanation, but Michael's instincts told him there was much more to the story. Will you consider the position? Sarah was quiet for nearly a minute, weighing factors he couldn't begin to guess. I would need to maintain some of my current schedule. I have responsibilities at home. That can be arranged, and I would prefer if my personal life remained private. Of course. Amanda made a sound of disgust. Michael, this is insane. You're hiring someone based on one night's work, and she's already making demands about privacy and special scheduling. My daughter needs me to be available during certain hours, Sarah said quietly, addressing Amanda directly for the first time. She has special needs, and her care routine is very specific. The mention of a daughter surprised Michael. Sarah's file had listed no dependents. How old is your daughter? 12. Her name is Lily. And Dr. Mitchell? He's listed as your emergency contact. A slight flush colored Sarah's cheeks. James and I have been dating for about 6 months. He's a pediatric specialist at Mount Sinai. He helps with Lily's medical care. Michael felt an unexpected stab of something that might have been jealousy, which was ridiculous given that he barely knew this woman. I see. So will you accept the position? Michael asked. Sarah looked once more at Amanda, whose expression had grown even more hostile, then back at Michael. I'll try it for a trial period. 1 month. If it doesn't work out for either of us, I'll return to my previous job with no hard feelings. Excellent, Michael said, standing to shake her hand. You can start Monday morning. After Sarah left, Amanda turned to Michael with barely controlled anger. You're making a huge mistake. There's something she's not telling us. Everyone has secrets, Amanda. Not everyone saves failing companies with mysterious expertise in Japanese business culture. Michael looked out his office window at the city beyond. Amanda was probably right to be suspicious. Sarah Chun was clearly more than she appeared to be. But whether that made her dangerous or simply interesting remained to be seen. Either way, Michael intended to find out. Sarah Chun stood in the lobby of Harrison Global Monday morning, wearing a simple navy blazer and matching skirt that she had purchased over the weekend. The clothes were professional but clearly inexpensive, and she felt acutely aware of how they contrasted with the designer outfits worn by other executives moving through the marble-floored space. Michael appeared at exactly 8:30, emerging from the executive elevator with a confident stride that spoke of someone accustomed to owning every room he entered. He wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Sarah earned in 3 months of night shift cleaning. "Sarah, good morning," he said, extending his hand. "Ready to dive into the chaos?" "As ready as I can be," she replied, accepting the handshake. His grip was firm and warm, lasting perhaps a moment longer than strictly professional. Michael led her to a smaller office adjacent to his own, furnished with a modern desk, computer setup, and a view of Lower Manhattan. "This will be your workspace. I've had IT set up your access codes for the systems you'll need." Sarah settled behind the desk and logged into the computer system. Within minutes, she was reviewing Michael's calendar and email correspondence, quickly identifying patterns in his communication style and business priorities. The work felt familiar in a way that both comforted and unnerved her. By mid-morning, Sarah had reorganized Michael's schedule to accommodate the rescheduled Yamamoto meeting and prepared briefing documents for his afternoon conference calls. She worked efficiently and quietly, fielding phone calls and managing correspondence as if she had been doing the job for years rather than hours. Michael found himself stealing glances at her throughout the morning. There was something almost regal in the way she carried herself, a natural grace that seemed at odds with her modest background. When she spoke with international clients on the phone, her voice took on subtle accents that matched the caller's native language, suggesting a linguistic sophistication that went far beyond what she had revealed. During lunch break, Sarah excused herself to make a personal phone call. Michael couldn't help but overhear part of the conversation as she spoke in what sounded like perfect Mandarin to someone who was apparently providing afternoon care for her daughter. "You speak Chinese too?" Michael asked when she returned. "Mandarin and Cantonese," Sarah admitted, "plus some Korean and Thai. Languages were always easy for me." Michael leaned against her desk. "Sarah, I have to ask, where did you actually go to school? Your employment file doesn't list any college education, but you're obviously highly educated." Sarah's fingers paused over her keyboard. "I was homeschooled. My family believed in alternative approaches to education." It was another non-answer wrapped in reasonable explanation. Michael was beginning to recognize the pattern. Every personal question yielded just enough information to satisfy casual curiosity without revealing anything substantial about her background. "Tell me about your daughter," Michael said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Lily, right?" Sarah's expression softened immediately. "She's 12. I adopted her when she was 7 after her parents died in a car accident. She has autism spectrum disorder and some learning disabilities, but she's incredibly bright in her own way." "That must be challenging to manage on your own." "James helps a lot," Sarah said, though Michael noticed she didn't elaborate on the relationship. "He's very good with children who have special needs." Michael found himself wondering what Dr. James Mitchell was like. Was he someone Sarah loved, or simply a convenient support system for raising a special needs child? The possibility that she might be settling for security rather than passion bothered him more than it should have. That afternoon, Sarah accompanied Michael to a video conference with potential clients in Seoul. As the Korean executives outlined their requirements, Sarah took detailed notes and occasionally whispered clarifications to Michael about cultural context and business customs. Her insights proved invaluable when negotiations reached a delicate point over contract terms. After the call ended successfully, Michael turned to Sarah with genuine admiration. "You just helped me close a $2 million deal. How did you know that bowing slightly during the video call would be important to them?" "Respect is universal," Sarah replied simply. "The specific expressions vary by culture, but the underlying principle remains the same." "You sound like someone who learned that lesson the hard way." Sarah's face went very still. "Everyone learns about respect eventually, Mr. Harrison." Michael studied her carefully. There was pain in her voice, old hurt that had been carefully buried but never fully healed. He wanted to press for details, but something in her expression warned him away from the subject. Instead, he found himself thinking about Sarah's past as he drove home that evening. Her linguistic skills, cultural knowledge, and natural business instincts suggested someone with formal training and significant experience. Yet she worked night cleaning shifts and lived in Queens with an adopted daughter. What had happened to derail what should have been a brilliant career? Why was someone with her obvious talents scrubbing office floors and emptying waste baskets? And why did she seem so determined to remain invisible? Michael's curiosity about Sarah Chun was rapidly becoming something more complicated. He found himself looking forward to their conversations, noticing the way she unconsciously tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when concentrating, appreciating the quiet competence with which she managed complex tasks. It was unprofessional and potentially problematic. Sarah worked for him, and regardless of whatever secrets she might be hiding, she was clearly involved with Dr. Mitchell. Michael had no business developing personal feelings for his assistant. But as he pulled into his driveway in the exclusive Greenwich neighborhood where he lived alone in a house far too large for one person, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah Chun was going to change his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. 20 miles away in Queens, Sarah was helping her daughter Lily with homework at their small kitchen table. The apartment was modest but warm, filled with Lily's artwork and carefully chosen furniture that created a sense of home despite the limited space. Lily looked up from her math workbook with serious dark eyes. "Sarah, are you going to marry James?" Sarah's pen paused over the bills she was reviewing. "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" "He asked me how I would feel about it yesterday when he took me to the park." Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest. James was a good man who genuinely cared for both of them. But the idea of marriage felt like surrendering to a safe, predictable future rather than choosing one she actively wanted. "What did you tell him?" "I said you seemed sad sometimes, even when you smile." "I don't think James makes you not sad." Out of the mouths of babes, Sarah looked at her perceptive daughter and realized that Lily had identified something Sarah herself had been reluctant to acknowledge. James offered security and stability, but he didn't make her heart race or her spirit soar. And after one day working closely with Michael Harrison, Sarah was beginning to remember what it felt like when someone did. 3 weeks into Sarah's employment at Harrison Global, Michael received an urgent call from a potential client in Los Angeles. Technovision Industries needed immediate consultation on a joint venture with a consortium of Asian manufacturers, and they were willing to pay premium rates for Michael's expertise provided he could arrive within 48 hours. Michael booked 2 first-class tickets to LAX without hesitation. Sarah's insights had proven invaluable in every international negotiation since she joined his team, and the Technovision deal involved partnerships with companies from Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. Her cultural knowledge could make the difference between success and failure. "I've never flown first class," Sarah admitted as they settled into the spacious cabin seats. She looked uncomfortable with the luxury, declining the champagne offered by the flight attendant and choosing water instead. "You'll get used to it," Michael replied, though he found her modesty refreshing compared to the entitled attitudes of most executives in his circle. During the 5-hour flight, they reviewed the Technovision proposal together. Sarah identified several potential cultural obstacles in the proposed partnership structure and suggested modifications that would appeal to the Asian sensibilities without compromising American business interests. Michael found himself increasingly impressed by her strategic thinking and ability to see negotiations from multiple perspectives simultaneously. They checked into the Beverly Hills Hotel late Tuesday evening. Michael had reserved a 2-bedroom suite, partly for convenience and partly because he wanted to continue their strategy discussions over room service dinner. Sarah seemed hesitant about the arrangement, but didn't object directly. The Technovision meetings began early Wednesday morning in a glass-walled conference room overlooking Century City. CEO David Martinez was a sharp-featured man in his 50s who had built his company from a garage startup into a billion-dollar technology empire. He outlined his vision for expanding into Asian markets while maintaining American innovation standards. Sarah's contributions during the discussions were subtle but crucial. She helped Michael navigate cultural nuances that could have derailed negotiations before they properly began. When Martinez proposed contract terms that might be interpreted as disrespectful by Japanese partners, Sarah suggested alternative language that preserved the intent while avoiding offense. By Thursday afternoon, they had the framework for a deal that satisfied all parties. Martinez shook hands with Michael enthusiastically and promised to have legal documents prepared within the week. The fee for Harrison Global's consultation services was substantial enough to cover operational costs for the next 6 months. That evening, Michael suggested dinner at a high-end restaurant in West Hollywood to celebrate. Sarah agreed, though she seemed increasingly nervous as the day progressed. She had been checking her phone frequently and making quiet calls to someone Michael assumed was either Dr. Mitchell or Lily's caregiver. The restaurant was intimate and dimly lit, with tables positioned for private conversation. Sarah had changed from her business attire into a simple black dress that accentuated her natural elegance. Michael found himself studying her face in the candlelight, noticing details he had missed during their office interactions. The way her eyes crinkled slightly when she smiled, the graceful movement of her hands when she spoke, the intelligence that radiated from her expression even during casual conversation. "Tell me something about yourself that isn't related to work," Michael said over their main course. Sarah considered the request carefully. "I like to paint. Watercolors mostly. Lily and I spend weekend afternoons in Central Park making pictures of the scenery." "What do you paint?" "Landscapes, flowers, sometimes people. Nothing ambitious. It's relaxing." Michael tried to imagine Sarah sitting beside a pond in Central Park, patiently teaching a 12-year-old girl how to mix colors and capture light on paper. The mental image was both appealing and strangely moving. "What about you?" Sarah asked. "What do you do when you're not building business empires?" Michael realized he couldn't remember the last time someone had asked him that question. His entire life revolved around Harrison Global and the endless cycle of meetings, negotiations, and strategic planning that kept the company growing. "I read business journals, play tennis at my club, attend charity events that are good for networking." "That sounds lonely," Sarah observed quietly. The comment hit closer to home than Michael cared to admit. His personal life had become secondary to professional success years ago. He maintained a circle of business associates and attended social functions, but genuine relationships had gradually disappeared from his world. "Success requires sacrifice," Michael said, though the words sounded hollow even to himself. "Does it? Or do we just tell ourselves that to justify choices we're afraid to examine too closely?" Their conversation was interrupted when the restaurant manager approached their table with an apologetic expression. A severe thunderstorm was moving through the area, and several nearby streets had been closed due to flooding. The hotel shuttle service had been suspended until the weather cleared. Michael and Sarah waited in the restaurant lobby for over an hour, watching rain pound against the windows with unusual intensity for Southern California. When it became clear that transportation would not resume that evening, they decided to walk the few blocks back to their hotel despite the storm. The rain soaked through their clothes within minutes. Sarah's careful hairstyle collapsed, and her dress clung to her figure in ways that made Michael acutely aware of her physical presence. They ran the last block, laughing breathlessly as they reached the hotel lobby, dripping wet and slightly ridiculous. In the elevator ascending to their suite, the atmosphere between them shifted. They stood closer together than usual, ostensibly to avoid dripping water on the carpet, but Michael could feel the warmth radiating from Sarah's body and smell the faint scent of her perfume mixed with rain. When they reached their floor, Sarah fumbled with the keycard, her hands shaking slightly from cold or nervousness. Michael moved behind her to help, placing his hand over hers to steady the card. The contact sent electricity through his arm that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Sarah turned to face him, and suddenly they were standing inches apart in the hotel hallway. Her dark eyes met his, and Michael saw his own attraction reflected there along with something that looked like panic. "Sarah," he said softly. She didn't step away immediately. For a heartbeat, they stood suspended in possibility, the air between them charged with unspoken desire. Michael could see her pulse beating rapidly at the base of her throat, could hear the slight catch in her breathing. Then Sarah seemed to remember something that shattered the moment. She stepped back quickly, shaking her head. "I can't," she whispered. "James is expecting my call. I need to get out of these wet clothes." She disappeared into the suite, leaving Michael standing alone in the hallway wondering what had just happened and why he felt like he had lost something precious before he even understood what it was. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in Manhattan, Amanda Stevens was making phone calls to old contacts in the corporate intelligence network she had maintained since her early days in corporate law. Sarah Chun was proving more elusive to investigate than expected, but Amanda's persistence was finally yielding results. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a former colleague who now worked for a private investigation firm specializing in corporate background checks. "Amanda, you're not going to believe what I found," the investigator said. "Your Sarah Chun used to be Sarah Nakamura-Chun. Ring any bells?" Amanda felt her blood turn to ice. The Nakamura family had been one of the most prominent Japanese-American business dynasties until their empire collapsed in scandal 15 years ago. If Sarah was connected to that family, her presence at Harrison Global was no coincidence. "Tell me everything," Amanda said. Sarah returned from Los Angeles on Friday afternoon with her world fundamentally altered. The almost kiss with Michael in the hotel hallway had awakened feelings she had buried for years, emotions she couldn't afford to acknowledge given her carefully constructed life with Lily and James. She spent the weekend attempting to restore normalcy. James took them to the Museum of Natural History, where Lily marveled at the dinosaur exhibits while Sarah pretended to focus on their conversation about pediatric development protocols. But her mind kept drifting to the warmth of Michael's hand covering hers, the intensity in his dark eyes, the moment when everything had balanced on the edge of possibility. Monday morning brought unwelcome clarity. Amanda Stevens was waiting in Sarah's office when she arrived, seated in the guest chair with the predatory stillness of a cat watching a mouse. "We need to talk," Amanda said without preamble. "Privately." Sarah set down her purse and coffee with deliberate calm. "About what?" "About who you really are, Serafina Nakamura-Chun." The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. No one had called her Serafina in 15 years. She had legally changed her name, created a new identity, built walls around her past that she believed were impenetrable. The fact that Amanda had uncovered her true identity meant those walls were crumbling. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah said quietly. Amanda pulled a manila folder from her briefcase and spread several documents across Sarah's desk. Old newspaper clippings, corporate filings, and photographs that Sarah recognized with sickening familiarity. Her parents had a charity gala, the Nakamura Corporation headquarters. Headlines about fraud investigations and asset seizures. Daughter of Kenji and Margaret Nakamura, Amanda continued conversationally. Heiress to a $2 billion import-export empire that collapsed in scandal 15 years ago. Educated at Stanford and Tokyo University. Fluent in 6 languages. Former vice president of international development for Nakamura Corporation before it all went to hell. Sarah sank into her chair, her carefully maintained composure finally fracturing. "What do you want?" "The same thing you want, I imagine. Justice." "Justice?" Amanda leaned forward, her blue eyes bright with malicious satisfaction. "Your family didn't destroy themselves, Sarah. They were destroyed by companies like Harrison Global that used predatory business practices to undermine Asian competitors in the American market." Sarah's throat felt like it was closing. "That's not possible. Michael was barely out of college 15 years ago." "Michael was a junior executive, but Harrison Global was very much involved. I should know. I worked in their legal department during the Nakamura investigation." Amanda pulled out another document, this one bearing the Harrison Global letterhead. Corporate communications, contract modifications, regulatory complaints filed in bad faith. Michael's father, Thomas Harrison, orchestrated a campaign to discredit Nakamura Corporation and steal their government contracts. Sarah stared at the papers with growing horror. The Harrison Global logo appeared on document after document related to her family's downfall. Legal challenges to Nakamura's licensing agreements. Complaints to regulatory agencies about alleged safety violations that were later proven false. Character assassination disguised as legitimate business competition. "Why are you showing me this?" Sarah whispered. "Because I want Michael Harrison to suffer the way your family suffered. I want him to lose everything he cares about, starting with his precious company. I won't help you destroy him." Amanda's smile turned cold. "Yes, you will. Because if you don't, I'll expose your identity to every major business publication in the country. I'll make sure everyone knows that Sarah Chun is actually Serafina Nakamura, the heiress who disappeared after her family's empire collapsed. Your quiet life in Queens will be over. Lily will become a target for reporters and corporate enemies." Dr. Mitchell will discover that the woman he's been dating has been lying about her identity from the beginning. The threat was expertly calculated. Sarah could handle public exposure herself, but the idea of subjecting Lily to media scrutiny was unbearable. Her daughter had already endured enough trauma in her young life. "What exactly do you want me to do?" Sarah asked. "Seduce him. Make him fall in love with you. Then destroy him from the inside. Use his feelings against him to sabotage his business relationships, steal his clients, ruin his reputation. I want Michael Harrison to lose everything his father stole from your family." "I can't do that." "You can and you will. Unless you prefer to explain to Lily why reporters are camping outside her school and why strange men are following her to therapy appointments." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling trapped between impossible choices. Everything she had built over the past 15 years, every sacrifice she had made to create a safe, stable life for Lily, was being held hostage to Amanda's desire for revenge. "I need time to think." "You have until tomorrow morning." "And Sarah? Don't even consider warning Michael about this conversation. I have contacts throughout this industry who would be very interested in the story of the Nakamura heiress working as a janitor." After Amanda left, Sarah sat alone in her office for nearly an hour, staring at the documents that connected Michael's company to her family's destruction. The evidence was damning and authentic. Harrison Global had indeed played a role in ruining the Nakamura Corporation, though Michael himself had probably been unaware of his father's tactics. That evening, Sarah tried to approach Michael romantically as Amanda demanded. She stayed late at the office, waiting until the building was nearly empty before knocking on his door. When he invited her in, she moved closer than usual, allowed her hand to linger on his shoulder longer than necessary when reviewing documents. Michael responded to the subtle signals with obvious pleasure and growing attraction. When he suggested ordering dinner and continuing their work in his private conference room, Sarah agreed. She told herself she could go through with Amanda's plan, that protecting Lily justified any deception. But when Michael looked at her across the conference table with genuine warmth and growing affection, Sarah couldn't bear the manipulation any longer. The lies were poisoning everything between them before it could even begin. "Michael, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "What is it?" Sarah took a shuddering breath and began to speak. She told him about Amanda's visit, about the documents connecting Harrison Global to her family's downfall, about the blackmail and the demand that she seduce him for revenge. She revealed her true identity, her past as Serafina Nakamura, and the 15 years of hiding that had brought her to his office. Michael listened in complete silence, his expression growing colder with each revelation. When she finished, he stood slowly and walked to the window, his back rigid with tension. "So everything between us has been a lie," he said finally. "No, Michael, that's not true. My feelings for you are real." "Your feelings?" Michael turned to face her, his dark eyes blazing with hurt and anger. "You mean the feelings you were supposed to use to destroy me? How convenient that they developed just when Amanda needed them most. It's not like that, isn't it? You've been lying about your identity since the day we met. You're the heiress to a company my family apparently helped destroy, and you've been working in my building for months without revealing any of this. Now I'm supposed to believe that your sudden romantic interest is genuine rather than strategic?" Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. "I told you the truth because I couldn't go through with Amanda's plan. Doesn't that count for something? It counts for the fact that you're a better person than she is. But it doesn't change the fact that you've been deceiving me from the beginning." Michael walked past her toward the door, pausing only to deliver his final verdict. "Clear out your office tonight, Sarah. Or Serafina, whoever you actually are. I never want to see you again." The door closed behind him with devastating finality, leaving Sarah alone with the wreckage of the only relationship that had mattered to her in 15 years. 3 months had passed since Michael last saw Sarah, but her absence haunted every corner of Harrison Global. Her empty office had been converted back to storage space, yet Michael found himself walking past it several times each day, remembering the quiet efficiency with which she had managed his professional life and the way she had begun to fill the emotional void he hadn't even realized existed. The Yamamoto deal had proceeded successfully, but subsequent international negotiations felt clumsy and uncertain without Sarah's cultural insights. Michael had hired 2 professional translators and a cultural consultant, but none of them possessed her intuitive understanding of the subtle dynamics that could make or break cross-cultural business relationships. More troubling than the professional impact was the personal aftermath. Michael's anger at Sarah's deception had gradually evolved into something more complex as he examined his own family's history. The documents Amanda had shown Sarah were authentic, but Michael had never seen them before. His father's involvement in the Nakamura Corporation's downfall was news to him, and the revelation forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about the foundation of his own success. On a gray December morning, Michael finally decided to investigate properly. He spent hours in Harrison Global's archives, digging through files from 15 years earlier. What he discovered sickened him. His father had indeed orchestrated a systematic campaign to destroy the Nakamura Corporation, using legal challenges, regulatory complaints, and media manipulation to undermine their reputation and steal their government contracts. The most damaging evidence came from his father's private correspondence, locked away in a safe that Michael had inherited but never opened. Letters between Thomas Harrison and various corporate allies outlined strategies for neutralizing Asian competition through character assassination and bureaucratic warfare. The Nakamura family had been targeted not for any wrongdoing, but simply because they represented successful Asian entrepreneurs in an industry that older American businessmen considered their exclusive domain. Michael felt physically ill reading his father's words. The casual racism and ruthless ambition revealed a man he had never truly known. Thomas Harrison had built his empire on the ruins of other people's dreams, and Michael had inherited that blood money without understanding its true cost. But the most shocking discovery came in a file marked Legal Department, Confidential. Amanda Stevens hadn't just worked in Harrison Global's legal department during the Nakamura investigation. She had been one of the primary architects of the campaign against them. Her fingerprints were on every forged document, every false regulatory complaint, every piece of manufactured evidence that had brought down Sarah's family. Amanda had used Michael's ignorance about his father's crimes to manipulate both him and Sarah. She had possessed the real documents all along, but had also created modified versions to support whatever narrative served her purposes. The papers she showed Sarah were authentic, but she had conveniently omitted Michael's lack of involvement in order to fuel Sarah's sense of betrayal. Michael confronted Amanda that same afternoon in her corner office. She was reviewing contracts when he entered, her blonde hair perfectly styled and her blue suit immaculate as always. "I know what you did," Michael said without preamble. "To the Nakamura family 15 years ago, and to Sarah 3 months ago." Amanda didn't even look up from her paperwork. "I wondered when you would finally bother to investigate your own company's history. You destroyed innocent people. Sarah's parents died in poverty because of schemes you helped create. I protected American business interests from foreign competition. Your father understood that sometimes preservation requires aggressive tactics." Michael stared at her with growing revulsion. "Sarah never tried to seduce me for revenge. She told me the truth because she couldn't bear to manipulate someone she cared about." How touching and irrelevant. "She's gone, Michael. You made sure of that when you threw her out of the building." "Where is she?" Amanda finally looked up, smiling with cold satisfaction. "Why? Planning a grand gesture of apology? I'm afraid you're too late for that." "What do you mean?" "Sarah Chun, or should I say Serafina Nakamura, left New York 6 weeks ago. She's living in a charming little town called Bend, Oregon, teaching Japanese language classes at the local community college. Quite the come down from her previous career aspirations." Michael felt his heart hammering against his ribs. "How do you know this?" "I make it my business to keep track of potential threats. She's been rebuilding her life quite successfully, actually. Dr. Mitchell followed her out there. Opened a pediatric practice. Very romantic. James went with her. More than that. He proposed last month. The wedding is scheduled for this Saturday at a lovely little chapel overlooking the Cascade Mountains. I'm sure it will be very picturesque." The words hit Michael like physical blows. Sarah was getting married in 4 days to a man who had stood by her when Michael had abandoned her. Dr. Mitchell had believed in her when Michael had chosen suspicion over trust. "You look surprised," Amanda continued. "Did you really think she would wait for you to come to your senses? Sarah is a practical woman. She chose security and stability over passion and chaos. Frankly, I think she made the right decision." Michael left Amanda's office without another word. Within an hour, He had booked a flight to Portland and arranged for a rental car. He had no plan beyond reaching Sarah before she married someone else. No clear idea what he would say or do when he found her. The flight to Oregon felt endless. Michael spent the time reviewing everything he knew about Sarah's past and their brief relationship. He thought about her quiet strength in raising Lily alone, her courage in revealing Amanda's blackmail scheme despite the personal cost, and the way she had looked at him in that hotel hallway in Los Angeles when everything had balanced on the edge of possibility. He had been a coward and a fool. Sarah had offered him honesty and vulnerability, and he had responded with suspicion and rejection. She had risked everything to tell him the truth, and he had punished her for it. The drive from Portland to Bend took him through mountains and forests that reminded him why people chose Oregon for new beginnings. The landscape was beautiful and peaceful, offering the kind of quiet sanctuary that someone like Sarah would find appealing after years of hiding in New York's urban chaos. Michael found her address easily enough in the small-town directory. The house was a modest craftsman cottage with a well-tended garden and a wheelchair ramp leading to the front porch. Through the front window, he could see Sarah moving around the kitchen, preparing what looked like dinner for 3 people. She looked different than he remembered. Her hair was shorter, styled in a way that made her appear younger and less guarded. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, and there was something relaxed about her posture that suggested she had found peace in this quiet place. As Michael sat in his rental car, trying to summon the courage to approach the house, a silver sedan pulled into the driveway. A tall man with graying temples and kind eyes emerged from the driver's seat, followed by Lily, who had grown taller and seemed more confident than when Michael had last seen her. Dr. James Mitchell looked exactly like the kind of man Sarah deserved. Stable, gentle, clearly devoted to both her and Lily. When Sarah appeared in the doorway to greet them, the smile on her face was genuine and warm. Michael watched James kiss Sarah's cheek and Lily hug her with enthusiastic affection. This was what Sarah had built for herself in Oregon: a real family, a peaceful life, a future free from the complications and dangers of her past. And Michael had arrived 4 days too late to offer her anything that could compete with what she already had. The wedding was tomorrow. Sarah had chosen her path, and Michael had no right to disrupt the happiness she had finally found. But as he started the car to drive back to Portland, Michael knew he couldn't leave without at least seeing her face one more time, without telling her that he finally understood the magnitude of what he had lost when he chose pride over love. The chapel where Sarah would marry Dr. Mitchell was only 2 miles away. Michael drove past it slowly, memorizing the details of the place where the woman he loved would promise herself to someone else. Then he checked into a nearby hotel and prepared to attend a wedding where his heart would break with every spoken vow. The Mount Bachelor Chapel stood against the backdrop of snow-capped peaks, its rustic timber walls and stained glass windows creating an atmosphere of quiet reverence. Saturday morning brought crisp December air and brilliant sunshine that seemed to bless the small gathering of guests assembling for Sarah and James's wedding. Michael sat in the back row, having slipped into the chapel moments before the ceremony began. He wore a dark suit and carried a leather portfolio containing documents that could change everything, but he still wasn't certain he had the right to use them. Sarah's transformation into a bride was breathtaking. She wore a simple ivory dress that complemented her natural elegance, her dark hair styled in soft waves beneath a delicate veil. As she walked down the aisle on the arm of an elderly man Michael didn't recognize, her face radiated the peaceful happiness of someone who had found her place in the world. James Mitchell waited at the altar with obvious joy and devotion. He was handsome in an understated way, with the kind of steady presence that promised security and faithfulness. When Sarah reached his side, he took her hands with gentle reverence, and Michael felt his heart break at the tenderness of the gesture. Lily sat in the front row wearing a pale blue dress, beaming with happiness for the woman who had rescued her from tragedy and given her a loving home. Seeing Sarah's adopted daughter so content and thriving made Michael question his own motives for being here. What right did he have to disrupt this family's happiness? The minister, a silver-haired man with kind eyes, began the ceremony with words about love, commitment, and the courage required to build a life with another person. Michael listened to the familiar phrases while wrestling with his conscience. He could leave now, allow Sarah to marry a good man who would cherish her, and returned to New York with the knowledge that she was finally safe and happy. But then the minister reached the traditional moment that would seal Sarah's fate forever. If anyone present knows of any lawful impediment why these two persons should not be joined in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The chapel fell silent except for the soft whisper of wind through the pine trees outside. Michael felt the weight of the documents in his portfolio, evidence that would prove Sarah's innocence and expose Amanda's manipulation. More importantly, they would prove that Michael himself had never been complicit in his father's crimes against her family. 2 minutes. That's how long the traditional pause lasted before the minister would continue with the vows that would make Sarah Mrs. James Mitchell. 2 minutes to decide whether love justified disrupting the peace she had worked so hard to build. Michael stood slowly, his movement causing heads to turn throughout the small chapel. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the sacred space. "But there are things Sarah needs to know before she makes this commitment." Sarah turned toward him with shock and something that looked like panic. James's expression shifted from confusion to protective anger as he stepped slightly in front of his bride. "Sir, this is neither the time nor the place for whatever business you may have," the minister said firmly. "I'm afraid it is," Michael replied, walking forward with deliberate steps. "Sarah, my name is Michael Harrison. We worked together in New York before I made the biggest mistake of my life." James moved protectively closer to Sarah. "I know who you are. Sarah told me everything. I think you should leave." "James, please," Sarah said quietly, finding her voice at last. "Let him speak." Michael reached the front of the chapel and opened his portfolio, removing copies of the documents he had discovered in his father's files. "Sarah, everything Amanda Stevens told you was a lie. These are the real records from your family's case 15 years ago." He handed her the papers with hands that trembled slightly. "I was 20 years old and working as an intern when my father destroyed your family's business. I never knew about any of it until 3 months ago when I finally investigated our company's history." Sarah scanned the documents quickly, her wedding bouquet trembling in her other hand. Michael watched her face as she realized the truth. Amanda had manipulated both of them, using real events but false implications to fuel their mutual suspicion and pain. "Amanda Stevens was one of the architects of the campaign against your parents," Michael continued. "She blackmailed you into trying to seduce me, then convinced me that your feelings were part of some elaborate revenge scheme. She played us against each other because she knew that together we were stronger than apart." "Why are you telling me this now?" Sarah whispered. "Because I love you," Michael said simply. "Because I've spent 3 months realizing that everything good in my life began the night you saved my company and ended the morning I was too proud and scared to trust what we had together." James stepped forward, his face pale but his voice steady. "Sarah, you don't have to listen to this. We have a good life here. Lily is happy. You're safe." Sarah looked between the two men, her eyes bright with tears. "James, you're right. You've given me everything I thought I wanted. Security, stability, a peaceful life for Lily." Michael felt his heart sink as Sarah seemed to choose the safer path. "But," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger, "Lily told me months ago that you don't make me not sad. She was right. You make me grateful and comfortable, but you don't make my soul sing." She turned to Michael, her dark eyes searching his face. "You broke my heart when you sent me away. How do I know you won't do it again when things get difficult?" "You don't," Michael admitted. "But I'm not the same man who let fear drive you away. I've spent 3 months learning that success means nothing without someone to share it with. I've discovered that my father's sins aren't mine to carry, but they are mine to make right." He pulled out one final document, this one bearing his own signature. "I've liquidated half my personal assets to create a foundation in your parents' names. It will help families destroyed by corporate malfeasance rebuild their lives. I want you to run it, if you'll have it. And me." Sarah stared at the foundation documents, tears streaming down her face. The gesture represented more than money. It was acknowledgement, justice, and a promise that the past would be honored rather than hidden. James stepped back with quiet dignity. "Sarah, I love you enough to want your happiness more than my own. If this man can give you what I cannot, then you should go to him." "James, I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry for following your heart. That's what love is supposed to do." Sarah turned back to Michael, her bouquet falling forgotten to the chapel floor. "Are you sure about this? Really sure?" I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Sarah closed the distance between them in 3 quick steps, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. When their lips met, Michael felt 15 years of loneliness and 3 months of anguish dissolve into perfect rightness. The chapel erupted in murmured conversations and surprised gasps, but Michael and Sarah heard none of it. They were lost in each other, in the promise of second chances and love that had survived deception, betrayal, and the cruelest kind of separation. When they finally broke apart, Lily was standing beside them, grinning with 12-year-old satisfaction. "I told you James didn't make you not sad," she said to Sarah. "This one does." 2 years later, Michael and Sarah Harrison stood in the ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel in Manhattan, celebrating the 2nd anniversary of the Kenji and Margaret Nakamura Foundation. The organization had helped more than 200 families rebuild their lives after corporate wrongdoing, and Sarah's work running it had restored her sense of purpose and justice. Lily, now 14 and thriving, served as the foundation's youngest volunteer, using her own experience with trauma to help other children whose families had been disrupted by business scandals. She had gained confidence and social skills that amazed everyone who knew her story. Amanda Stevens was serving a federal sentence for corporate fraud and conspiracy. Her manipulation of the Nakamura case had been part of a larger pattern of illegal activity that federal investigators uncovered during their review of Harrison Global's historical practices. As Michael watched his wife address the crowd about the foundation's latest initiatives, he marveled at how completely his life had changed. Sarah had transformed him from a lonely workaholic into a man who understood that success meant building something larger than himself. "Thank you," Sarah said later that evening as they danced to the gentle music of the foundation's anniversary celebration, "for giving me back my family's honor, for choosing love over fear, for showing me that sometimes the best things in life are worth waiting for." "Thank you," Michael replied, "for saving my company in 2 minutes and my soul in 2 years." They danced until the last guests departed, holding each other in the warm glow of love that had survived every test and emerged stronger than either had dared to hope possible. In the end, Sarah Chun had indeed solved Michael Harrison's problem in 2 minutes. It had just taken them both much longer to realize that the problem was loneliness, and the solution was each other.